She found men in black at her father's grave. A Mafia boss was repaying a debt to a single mom. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Olivia Harrison had never imagined that her life would lead her to this moment, standing alone at her father's grave, feeling the cold weight of the loss. And yet, something else loomed in the air, something far more chilling than the grief that weighed on her heart. It had been a few weeks since her father passed, and she still found herself visiting his grave every week, speaking to the man who had always been there for her, even if his choices hadn't always been perfect. Olivia was a single mom, just trying to make ends meet. The quiet cemetery was a stark contrast to the chaotic life she led. With her young son to care for and the burden of making it on her own, the peacefulness of the cemetery was the only place where she could find a moment of clarity. She knelt beside her father's headstone, her fingers tracing the engraved letters, when suddenly, she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she turned to see a group of men in black suits walking toward her. Their faces were unreadable, their steps deliberate, as if they had purposefully arrived at that exact moment. They didn't belong here. They were out of place in this quiet, solemn cemetery. Olivia's heart raced. She didn't know why, but she felt the weight of their presence like an invisible force. One of the men stepped forward, and her breath caught in her throat. His face was sharp, his eyes dark and cold, but there was something commanding about him. His tailored suit, his perfect posture, everything about him screamed power. He didn't look like just anyone. He looked like someone important. "Olivia Harrison," he asked, his voice deep and calm. The way he said her name made her shiver. How did he know her name? She nodded slowly, trying to collect herself, but fear started to creep in. "I'm Vincent Romano," the man continued. "I'm here to repay a debt your father owed." The words hit her like a punch. A debt? What kind of debt? Her mind raced as confusion clouded her thoughts. She had heard stories, but never imagined that she would be involved in something like this. The men around her were clearly not just ordinary people. The air seemed to shift as Vincent took a step closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, almost as if reading her mind. "I'm here to settle a debt that your father left behind. And part of that settlement includes making sure you're taken care of." Olivia's stomach twisted. She wasn't sure what he meant, but the tone in his voice suggested that whatever it was something she couldn't refuse. She had never been involved in her father's past dealings, and yet here she was, standing face to face with a man who seemed to have more power than anyone she had ever known. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaky but firm. Vincent's gaze softened for a moment, and then he spoke again. "I'm here to ensure that you and your son are safe. I'm not leaving until I know you're taken care of." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. What did that mean? Why was he doing this for her? She didn't understand, but she knew she didn't have the answers yet. She had just walked into something much bigger than herself, and she wasn't sure whether she was ready for it or not. Olivia felt the weight of Vincent's words linger in the air like an unspoken promise, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She stood there, frozen in place, as he looked at her with those intense, calculating eyes. Every part of her screamed to run, to get away from this man and the world he represented, but she couldn't move. She had a son to protect, and something in her gut told her that Vincent was not someone she could simply walk away from. "What do you mean, taken care of?" she asked, her voice trembling. Despite her best efforts to stay calm, Vincent's expression softened slightly, but there was still an air of authority that made it impossible for Olivia to ignore. "I'll make sure that no one harms you or your son. Whatever debts your father left behind, I'll handle them. You'll be safe, Olivia. And that's all that matters." Olivia's mind raced. She didn't know what kind of debt Vincent was talking about, but she had no intention of becoming part of his dangerous world. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice firm, though deep down, she was terrified. "I just want to raise my son and live a quiet life." Vincent stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You don't get to choose, Olivia. Your father made sure of that. You're already involved, whether you like it or not. The words hit her like a slap, and Olivia felt a surge of frustration and fear. She had never asked for this, had never known what kind of life her father had lived. He had always protected her from that side of his life, but now it seemed like his past was about to consume her. "I don't want your protection," she said, shaking her head. "I don't need it." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply nodded and turned toward the men who had been standing in the background, silently watching the exchange. "We'll take care of everything," he said to them. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. The way Vincent spoke, the authority in his voice, left no room for doubt. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a choice. And she was already too deep in it to back out. She stood there, helpless, as Vincent's men began to move, organizing themselves as if this were all just another day at the office. Olivia couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "I just want to go home," she whispered, more to herself than to Vincent. But he heard her. He always seemed to hear everything. "You will," he said, his voice almost gentle now, though there was no mistaking the underlying command. "But it won't be the same as it was before." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine at his words. What did he mean by that? Would she ever be able to live a normal life again? And what did Vincent Romano want from her? She didn't know the answers, but she felt the creeping sense that her life was about to change forever. "Come with me," Vincent said, his voice like velvet, but there was an edge to it that told Olivia she had no choice. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at her father's grave, the place that had once been a sanctuary for her. It was no longer just a quiet resting place. It had become the beginning of something much darker. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The sound of Vincent's footsteps echoed behind her as they walked away from the grave, and Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind the life she once knew. The life she had fought so hard to protect for herself and her son. She had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: she was no longer in control. And as Vincent led her into the unknown, she wondered just how much of her future would be shaped by this man and the dangerous world he was pulling her into. As Olivia followed Vincent through the darkening streets, her mind raced with questions she couldn't yet ask. She was walking beside a man who exuded power in every step, his presence undeniable, yet she had no idea where he was taking her or why. The streets were quiet, the sounds of the city slowly fading away as they moved deeper into a neighborhood she didn't recognize. The towering buildings loomed over them, casting long shadows, and Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of claustrophobia, like the walls were closing in. Vincent's men walked silently behind them, their presence a constant reminder that she was no longer in control of her own life. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that this was all happening too fast. Her father's death, the unexpected visit to his grave, and now this, being dragged into the world of a mafia boss who claimed he was repaying a debt. It was too much to process all at once. "Where are we going?" Olivia finally asked, her voice breaking the silence between them. Vincent didn't turn to look at her, but his response was calm, almost reassuring. "Somewhere safe," he said simply, as if that explained everything. But Olivia wasn't so easily comforted. She had been trying to live a quiet life, to protect her son and herself from the chaos of the world. Now, it seemed that chaos had found her, and there was no escaping it. They reached a large, iron gate that looked more like a fortress than the entrance to a home. Vincent gave a brief nod to one of his men, who stepped forward and unlocked the gate. The sound of the lock clicking open was like the final chapter in a story she didn't want to be a part of. As the gate creaked open, Olivia hesitated for a moment, looking back over her shoulder. The world she had known, the life she had fought to build, felt so far away now. She turned back to Vincent, who was already walking through the gate without a second glance. "Come on," he said, his tone not unkind, but firm. Olivia had no choice but to follow. They walked up the long driveway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. The mansion in front of her was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was grand, imposing, and dark, its tall windows reflecting the pale light of the moon. Everything about it screamed wealth and power, the kind of power that came from a world she didn't belong to. "This is where you'll stay for now," Vincent said as they reached the front door. His words felt final, and Olivia could sense that there was no arguing with him. The door opened with a quiet whoosh, revealing a lavish interior that seemed to stretch on forever. The floors were marble, the furniture expensive and perfectly arranged. Olivia couldn't help but feel like she had stepped into a different world, one where the rules didn't apply to people like her. Vincent stepped inside first, and Olivia reluctantly followed, her eyes scanning the opulent surroundings. She had always dreamed of a better life, but not like this. This was a life built on secrets, on debts, and on a power that she had no part in. "What do you want from me?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. "I don't want anything from you," he said quietly. "But you'll stay here. For your safety. Until things are settled." Olivia felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She didn't need anyone's protection, especially not from someone like him. But she couldn't deny the reality of the situation. She was trapped, and there was no way out. "This isn't what I want," she said, shaking her head. Vincent's gaze softened for a moment, but his expression remained unreadable. "I know it's not what you want," he said, "but it's what you need. And sometimes, what we need isn't always what we want." Olivia didn't reply. She didn't know what to say. She had been thrown into a world that made no sense, and now, she was expected to accept it. She looked around the room, trying to make sense of everything. It felt like a dream, like something that wasn't real. But the weight of Vincent's presence was all too real, and so was the knowledge that her life was no longer her own. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn, and she saw one of Vincent's men approaching with a set of keys in his hand. "Your room is ready," the man said, his voice devoid of emotion. Olivia didn't want to go with him, didn't want to be led to another cold, sterile room in this house of shadows. But she had no choice. She nodded silently and followed the man down a long hallway, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The door to the room was opened for her, and Olivia stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the large bed in the center of the room. The walls were lined with expensive artwork, the furniture lavish and pristine. Everything about the room screamed wealth, but it felt empty to her. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, staring at the bed. A sense of dread settled over her as she realized she had no idea what would happen next. She had no idea what Vincent wanted from her or how this debt her father had left behind would change everything. But one thing was certain, her life was no longer her own, and there was no going back. Olivia lay awake in the large, cold bed, staring at the ceiling as the sounds of the mansion settled into an eerie silence. She had been in the room for hours, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what had happened since she stepped into this strange world. She was alone, but the weight of Vincent's presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. The events of the day played over and over in her mind like a movie she couldn't escape. Her father's grave, the men in black, Vincent's words, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle that she didn't understand. She had never imagined that her life would take such a turn, that she would end up in the hands of a mafia boss who claimed he was repaying a debt. What kind of debt could her father have left behind? And why did it have to involve her? The questions gnawed at her, but every time she tried to find an answer, she was only met with more uncertainty. She had never been a part of her father's past, never known the kind of life he had led before he became the man who had raised her. But now, his secrets were spilling into her own life, whether she was ready for them or not. She sat up, running a hand through her messy hair. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the windows. She could hear the distant sound of footsteps outside the door, the quiet shuffle of Vincent's men as they moved through the house. It was unsettling, knowing that she was being watched, that her every move was being tracked. She got up from the bed, her bare feet cold against the marble floor, and walked over to the window. The view was breathtaking, the city skyline stretching out before her, the lights twinkling in the distance. But the beauty of the scene did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, looking out at the world she once knew, the world that now felt so far away. She had never wanted this. She had never asked for any of it. All she had wanted was a simple life, to raise her son in peace. But now, she was caught in a web of secrets and lies, and she didn't know how to escape. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard a soft knock at the door. She tensed, her heart skipping a beat. Who could it be? One of Vincent's men? Or worse, Vincent himself? She didn't know if she was ready to face him again, but she knew she didn't have a choice. With a deep breath, she walked over to the door and opened it. Standing in the doorway was one of the men, his expression unreadable. "Vincent wants to see you," he said, his voice low and flat. Olivia's stomach dropped. She had been avoiding him, trying to keep her distance, but now, it seemed like there was no way around it. She nodded, silently stepping aside to let the man enter. He didn't say another word, just turned and led her down the hallway. The house felt even more oppressive now, the walls closing in around her. As they walked, Olivia's mind raced. What did Vincent want from her? Why was he so insistent on having her stay here? She couldn't understand it. And yet, a part of her couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. There was something about him that both terrified and intrigued her. When they reached the study, the man knocked on the door before opening it. "He's waiting for you," he said before stepping back, leaving Olivia standing alone in front of the door. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves before entering. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Vincent was sitting behind a large, polished desk, his dark eyes watching her intently as she entered. He didn't smile, didn't offer any words of comfort. Instead, he just looked at her, waiting for her to speak. "What do you want from me?" Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Vincent didn't immediately respond. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "I told you," he said finally, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I want to protect you, to make sure you're safe." Olivia's heart sank. She didn't want his protection. She didn't want anything from him. She just wanted to go home, to find a way out of this mess. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice firm. "I never asked for it." Vincent's gaze never left hers, and for a moment, the silence between them felt suffocating. "You're already involved, Olivia," he said quietly. "There's no going back." His words hit her like a ton of bricks, and she felt a chill run through her body. She had been trying to avoid this reality, trying to hold onto the life she once knew. But now, it seemed like that life was slipping further and further away. She was no longer in control, and the weight of that truth was crushing. "I just want to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vincent's expression softened, but there was still a coldness in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. "You can't leave," he said simply. "Not until I know you're safe." Olivia didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in faster than she could escape. Olivia sat in the dimly lit study, the weight of Vincent's words pressing down on her like a physical force. She had never imagined that she would be in a situation like this, trapped in a world she didn't belong to, surrounded by men who spoke in ways that made her feel small and powerless. Yet here she was, sitting in front of the Mafia boss, the man who had somehow taken control of her life without asking for permission. She had tried to ignore it, to fight against it, but the truth was clear now. There was no escape. Vincent's gaze was unwavering as he watched her, his eyes dark and intense. He seemed to be waiting for her to speak, but Olivia couldn't find the words. How could she possibly make sense of everything that had happened in the past few days? Her father's death, the men in black, and now this, Vincent Romano. He was offering her protection, but what did that really mean? What did he want from her? She had been trying to live a simple life, to raise her son and stay away from the kind of danger that seemed to follow people like Vincent. But now, she was deep in the middle of it, and there was no way out. "I didn't ask for this," she finally said, her voice steady, though she could feel the panic rising inside her. Vincent didn't seem surprised by her words. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression still unreadable. "I know," he said quietly, "but it doesn't matter what you asked for, Olivia. You're in this now, and the only way out is through me." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of fear. What did he mean by that? What was he implying? "I don't want to be a part of your world," she said, shaking her head. "I just want to be left alone." Vincent's gaze softened ever so slightly, but there was still a sharpness to it that made Olivia's skin prickle. "You're already a part of it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Whether you like it or not. And now, you'll have to trust me if you want to survive." Olivia recoiled slightly at his words. She wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by someone like him. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she could take care of herself, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She wasn't strong enough to stand up against whatever forces were at play here. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside the door. Vincent's expression didn't change, but he nodded slightly, as if expecting something. The door opened, and one of his men stepped inside, holding a folder in his hand. "Everything is ready," the man said, his voice respectful. Vincent nodded again, then turned his attention back to Olivia. "You'll be staying here for now," he said, his tone final. Olivia's stomach twisted at the thought of being trapped in this mansion, surrounded by people she didn't trust. She wanted to refuse, to say no and walk out the door, but she knew that wasn't an option. Vincent had already made it clear that she had no choice. "For how long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent studied her for a moment before responding. "As long as it takes," he said simply. "Until I'm sure you're safe." Olivia didn't know how to respond. She didn't know if she could trust Vincent, but she knew she had no choice but to accept his offer. She wasn't sure what kind of protection he could offer, or what kind of price she would have to pay for it. But right now, it was the only option she had. "Fine," she said, her voice cold and distant. "I'll stay, but I'm not part of your world, Vincent. I'm just here to survive." Vincent's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, but there was no warmth in it. "That's all anyone wants," he said softly. "Survival." Olivia looked away, her eyes landing on the dark window that looked out over the city. She wondered what her life would be like now, in this world that wasn't hers, surrounded by people like Vincent. Would she ever escape? Or was she destined to live in the shadows forever? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but there was nothing she could do except follow his orders. She didn't know how to survive in this world, but she would have to figure it out. And for now, that meant staying in Vincent's world, whether she liked it or not. The days passed slowly for Olivia as she adjusted to the strange new reality Vincent had thrust her into. The mansion, once intimidating and foreign, began to feel like an odd kind of refuge, though she still couldn't shake the unease that followed her every step. She had been given a room on the second floor, and while it was luxurious in every sense, she found no comfort in the soft linens or the grand view of the city that stretched out before her. The walls felt too close, the silence too heavy. Vincent rarely spoke to her directly after that first meeting, but his presence was always there, lingering in the background, a constant reminder that she was no longer in control of her own life. Every time she saw him, she was reminded of the world she didn't understand, the world that now seemed to have a grip on her. But despite her fear and confusion, Olivia couldn't help but notice the subtle kindness in Vincent's actions. He never forced her to do anything, never made any overt demands. He simply gave her what she needed: safety, shelter, and, perhaps most unsettling of all, the feeling that her survival was his responsibility. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but she had no other choice but to accept his protection. The more time she spent in the mansion, the more questions began to arise. What exactly did Vincent want from her? Was this really about her father's debt, or was there something more? She had no answers, and the uncertainty was beginning to eat away at her. One evening, as she sat in the grand living room, flipping through a magazine, there was a knock at the door. Olivia stood, her heart racing, and opened it to find Vincent standing in the hallway, his dark eyes searching her face as if assessing something she couldn't understand. "I thought you might want some company," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "If you're free, I mean." Olivia hesitated for a moment. She had been avoiding him, not because she feared him, but because she didn't know how to deal with the complexity of his presence in her life. "I don't mind," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Vincent entered the room with his usual composed demeanor, taking a seat across from her on the plush sofa. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her, as if waiting for her to speak. The silence between them felt less oppressive than usual, and for the first time, Olivia found herself able to breathe a little easier. "I'm not used to all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never asked for any of it." Vincent didn't respond immediately, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "but sometimes we don't get to choose the paths our lives take." His words lingered in the air, and Olivia couldn't help but feel the weight of them. She had never thought of herself as someone who needed protection, but now, she was beginning to realize just how unprepared she was for the world she had been thrust into. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you helping me?" Vincent leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because I can," he said simply. "And because you need it." His words were simple, but there was something in the way he said them that made Olivia feel like there was more to it, something deeper that he wasn't sharing. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she confessed. "I'm just trying to survive, but I don't know how." Vincent's expression softened ever so slightly, and for a moment, Olivia saw a hint of something human behind the cold exterior he so carefully maintained. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. "You have me." Olivia looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say next. She didn't know how to respond to him, or to the growing sense of dependency she was starting to feel. She had come here to escape, to protect her son, but now, she was entangled in a world she didn't understand. And as much as she wanted to resist, part of her couldn't help but feel that this was the only way forward. As the night wore on, the tension in the room seemed to ease, and for the first time in a long while, Olivia allowed herself to relax. Maybe, just maybe, Vincent's presence wasn't as terrifying as she had thought. Maybe, in this strange and unfamiliar world, she could find a way to survive, if not thrive. But as the evening drew to a close, and Vincent stood to leave, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was just beginning to understand the kind of man he was. And the more she learned, the more dangerous it might be for both of them. As the days passed, Olivia found herself slowly becoming accustomed to the strange life Vincent had pulled her into. She spent her mornings in the quiet of the mansion, trying to come to terms with her new reality. The world she had known before seemed so far away now. Her modest apartment, the small job she had worked so hard to keep, the simple routine she had built for herself and her son. Now, everything was different. She was surrounded by luxury, but it felt hollow. She was no longer in control of her own life, and that was a hard pill to swallow. Vincent never pressured her to talk, but he was always there, watching her with that same intense gaze. He rarely spoke about what her father had done or the debt he owed, and Olivia was beginning to wonder if she would ever understand the full extent of it. One afternoon, Vincent invited her to join him for lunch in the grand dining room. She hesitated before agreeing, not sure if it was because she wanted to or because she was starting to feel a strange pull toward him. She followed him into the dining room, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty hallway. The room was warm, the large windows letting in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. As she sat down across from Vincent, she felt an awkward tension between them. The silence stretched on for a few moments before Vincent spoke. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice casual, but with an undertone of something more serious. Olivia looked up at him, her mind racing. "I don't know what to say," she replied, her voice soft. "I don't know where I fit into all of this." Vincent's eyes softened for a moment, but his expression remained unreadable. "You don't have to fit in," he said quietly. "You're here because you need to be. I'll take care of the rest." Olivia felt a wave of frustration rise in her chest. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't ask for any of this." Vincent didn't reply immediately. Instead, he reached for his drink, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. "Sometimes, life doesn't give us the choice to ask," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But you have a choice now. You can stay here, and I'll make sure you're safe. Or you can leave, and I can't promise you what will happen." Olivia's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The man sitting across from her was a mystery. Someone who had power, someone who could protect her, but someone who also held the key to the world she had been thrust into. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she knew she had no other choice. "What happens if I stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "If you stay, I'll make sure nothing harms you. But there's more to it than that," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "You'll be a part of this world now, Olivia, whether you want to be or not." The weight of his words sank in. Olivia had always believed that she could live her life on her own terms, that she could protect her son and build a future away from the darkness of the world. But now, it seemed like that future had been stolen from her. She didn't know if she could ever be comfortable in this world, but for now, it was the only option she had. "I'm not like you," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "I don't belong here." Vincent's gaze softened, but there was a quiet intensity behind his words. "You don't have to be like me, Olivia," he said. "You just have to trust that I'll keep you safe. That's all that matters right now." Olivia didn't respond. She couldn't. She was still processing everything, still trying to figure out how she had gotten here and what was expected of her. She glanced around the grand dining room, the elegant furnishings and pristine table setting feeling like a world she could never truly be a part of. "And if I leave?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Vincent's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes that made Olivia's heart skip a beat. "If you leave, you'll be on your own, and I can't guarantee you won't regret it." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of his promise, of the danger that lurked in the world Vincent inhabited, was too real to ignore. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. As the lunch continued in silence, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a tightrope, unsure of where it would lead, but knowing that if she fell, there would be no safety net to catch her. Olivia spent the next few days in a strange sort of limbo. The mansion, with its imposing walls and quiet hallways, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. She moved through it like a ghost, barely speaking to Vincent or his men, unsure of what to make of her new life. Vincent had promised her safety, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she understood of the world he came from. His words echoed in her mind. "You're already a part of it." That realization hit her harder than she had expected. She couldn't go back to the life she had known, not after everything that had happened. The moment she had walked into the mansion, her fate had been sealed, and there was no escaping that fact. One evening, Vincent appeared at her door again, his presence as commanding as ever. He didn't wait for an invitation. He simply walked in, as if it were his right. Olivia looked up from the book she had been pretending to read, her heart racing at the sight of him. "You're still not talking," he said, his voice soft but laced with something she couldn't quite place. Olivia lowered the book in her hands, trying to steady her breath. "There's not much to say," she replied, her tone distant. "I'm not a part of your world, Vincent. I don't know why you're doing this, but I don't belong here." Vincent didn't move. He just stood there, studying her as if he could see right through her defenses. "You think you don't belong here," he said after a long pause. "But the truth is, you do. Your father's debt doesn't just belong to him, Olivia. It's yours now too, whether you like it or not." His words hit her like a slap. She had never thought about it that way, never imagined that her father's mistakes would be passed down to her. She had been trying so hard to keep her son's life separate from all of this, but now, it felt like there was no escaping it. "I don't want any part of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to be left alone, to raise my son in peace." Vincent's expression softened, but there was no warmth in it. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until there was barely a foot separating them. "I understand that, Olivia," he said quietly. "But sometimes, peace comes at a price. And that's something you're going to have to accept." Olivia felt a knot tighten in her chest. She didn't want to accept it. She didn't want to be caught up in this world of power and danger. But as Vincent stood before her, his dark eyes unwavering, she realized that she had no choice. She was already too far in, and there was no going back. "I don't know how to trust you," she whispered. Vincent reached out and touched her arm, his grip gentle but firm. "Trust doesn't come easy, I know that. But I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm asking you to trust that I'll keep you safe. That's all." Olivia stared at him for a long moment, her thoughts swirling in confusion. She had no idea what to believe anymore. But in that moment, she felt a flicker of something. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just a desire for some sense of stability in a life that had become unpredictable and overwhelming. She didn't know what Vincent's intentions were, but there was something in his eyes that made her believe, just for a second, that he might actually mean it. "I'll stay," she said, the words coming out slowly, as if she had to convince herself more than anyone else. Vincent's expression remained stoic, but there was a glimmer of something in his gaze. "Good," he said softly. "You're safer here, Olivia, and I'll make sure of that." She nodded, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that for now, this was the only option she had. As Vincent turned to leave, Olivia's mind raced with questions, but she knew that answers wouldn't come easily. This world, his world, was something she would have to navigate on her own. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive it. Olivia had been living in Vincent's mansion for almost 2 weeks now, and though the lavish surroundings had initially seemed like a dream, they quickly began to feel suffocating. The silence of the house was almost deafening at times, and the constant presence of Vincent's men lurking in the background only added to her unease. Each day blended into the next, and while she was grateful for the safety Vincent had promised her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing herself. She had come here to escape the dangers of her past life, but now, it seemed like she was trapped in a different kind of cage, one built of wealth, power, and secrets she didn't fully understand. It wasn't that Vincent had done anything to hurt her. He hadn't. But there was something about him, something about the way he held everything in his grasp, that made her feel small, insignificant, and helpless. She had never been a passive person, but in his presence, she found herself constantly second-guessing her own thoughts, her own decisions. There was a pull toward him, an unspoken connection that she didn't know how to explain, but it terrified her. Vincent never asked anything from her. He never demanded anything in return for his protection. And yet, Olivia felt like she owed him something, though she couldn't figure out what it was. The mansion had become her new reality, but it wasn't her home. It was a place filled with luxury, yes, but also filled with a quiet, unnerving tension that she couldn't escape. One evening, as she walked through the vast hallways of the mansion, she heard the sound of soft footsteps approaching. She turned to see Vincent coming toward her, his dark suit immaculate as always. For a moment, they simply stood there, facing each other in the quiet hallway. "You're quiet tonight," Vincent said, his voice low and steady. Olivia swallowed, unsure of what to say. "I'm just trying to figure things out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong here, Vincent. I don't know how to be part of this world you're offering me." Vincent's gaze softened, but his expression remained unreadable. "You don't have to be a part of my world, Olivia," he said quietly. "But this is your world now. You don't have to fight it. You're safe here, and that's all that matters." Olivia's heart fluttered at his words. She wanted to believe him, but something inside her resisted. She had never been someone who relied on others, never been someone who let anyone else make decisions for her. And yet, here she was, in the midst of a life she had never chosen, and the man who had dragged her into it seemed to have all the answers. "I don't know if I can trust you," Olivia said, her voice shaking slightly. Vincent stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but there was a calmness to him that somehow put her at ease. "Trust isn't something I expect from you right away," he said. "But I need you to understand that you are safe here. You're not alone." Olivia looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of deceit, but all she saw was sincerity. It was a look that unnerved her because she couldn't decide if it was the truth or just a carefully crafted facade. "I don't want to owe anyone," she said, her voice barely audible. Vincent's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no amusement in it. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You're here because you need protection, and I'll give that to you. That's all." Olivia's chest tightened at his words. She hadn't asked for this protection. She hadn't asked for any of this. And yet, here she was, stuck in a world that wasn't hers, with no way out. She didn't know what to do with the feelings that were starting to stir inside her. Feelings of gratitude, yes, but also a deep sense of obligation that she couldn't shake. "I just want to know what's going to happen next," Olivia said, her voice almost pleading. Vincent's gaze softened further, and for a brief moment, he almost seemed human. "What happens next is up to you," he said quietly. "You can stay here, and I'll keep you safe. Or you can leave, but I can't promise you what will happen." Olivia nodded slowly, unsure of what to say or how to respond. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore, but she knew she couldn't keep running from this reality. For now, at least, this was her life. And Vincent Romano, whether she liked it or not, was a part of it. As Vincent turned to leave, Olivia stood in the hallway, the silence swallowing her once again. She was alone with her thoughts, but somehow, that felt more suffocating than the presence of Vincent himself. What was she doing here? And why did it feel like she was standing on the edge of something much larger than herself?